Hello, it's Peter Wright and Kathleen Beauvais with episode number 174 of the Yakking Show. This is the show to awaken you to new perspectives and help you navigate the changing world we're living in. We try and give you a bit of entertainment, a bit of education, most important, some enlightenment. And today's guest is certainly going to enlighten us in a specific area dear to my heart and many other people's hearts. But it's not my job to introduce guests because my co-host, Kathleen, does it a lot better than I do. So my first job is to introduce co-host Kathleen Beauvais from Waterloo, Ontario. How are you doing today, Kathleen?
I'm doing great, Peter. Thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you all so very much for tuning in to our show. We so appreciate you and we love reading your comments. So please keep those coming. And if anyone out there is interested in being a guest on our show, please don't hesitate to reach out to either Peter or myself. And as Peter mentioned, we do have another special guest with us today. Her name is Sarah Gage. Sarah, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great, thank you.
Now, Sarah, you are a financial coach and you have your own company called Wealth Confidence Coaching, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But first, for our audience, can you give us a little bit about your background and what led you into this line of work?
Sure. I actually have a background in corporate accounting, which is definitely not where my passions lie. I worked for a large financial services corporation for about 10 years. And from very early on, I noticed a lack of work-life balance, and it wasn't something that I ever really wanted to kind of get sucked into. All of the overtime and kind of a lot of people on the brink of burnout a lot of the time. So I had earlier in my life, thanks to some lessons learned from graduating university with some student debt and some credit card debt, I had learned how to manage my own finances the hard way. I had maxed out my credit card and I was kind of in this cycle. I didn't get a job right away out of university. And so I was in this cycle of using debt to kind of fill in my income gaps until my dad very kindly and generously offered to cover my credit card debt and let me pay him back interest-free. So because I did not change any of my habits or my attitude about credit, which was that it was essentially an extra bank account that I had access to, I ended up racking the credit card back up again. And so one day I kind of had this oh crap moment where I realized I've now effectively doubled my debt by taking advantage of my dad's generosity, but then continuing to use my credit card. So that was the moment where I was like, I need to buckle down, get this debt cleared up, and I am not going to carry a credit card balance anymore from here on out. So I was not earning a lot of income at that point. So I was kind of lucky that I learned that lesson early on. And by the time I got a corporate job with a higher income, I learned to live within much lower means. And that gave me the flexibility to then save to be able to leave that corporate job. And when I was considering what I would want to do with myself, once I left, I thought, the life improvement that I experienced from going from those struggles with debt and living under that stress and that pressure to having my finances under control and living within my means and having all of these options available to me, I want to help other people have that similar experience. And so a friend of mine came across a financial coach on Facebook, and she said, "Isn't this kind of like what you said you wanted to do?" And I had never heard of financial coaching up until that point. And I was like, that is exactly what I want to do, which is help other people get their finances under control and experience those benefits that I experienced. So eventually I was able to transition from my corporate role to full-time coaching.
Well done.
Yeah,
Excellent.
well done. Very good. One of the few who does it. I don't know the percentage, but for people I talk to, huge percentage live payday to payday, right?
Exactly.
And many with their own businesses on perpetual overdraft. So well done. So you're a coach. Who's your typical client? Who would be the average person that comes to you? Give us their profile.
So typically it would be someone in a similar situation where they're kind of starting to notice that pattern where they kind of always are carrying this debt, which they're using to fill in gaps from overspending. Maybe not paying very close attention to their money. They don't have a plan. They don't have a budget. They're kind of winging it. And then oftentimes, actually, people come to me where they've had a bit of a windfall. And one example is a consumer proposal, which is not so much windfall, but getting a plan in place to pay down your debt, a big tax refund, having left a marriage and coming out of that with a settlement. And they're starting to recognize the pattern in their own life where they know that if they continue with the same spending habits, they're going to end up right back where they started. So they're kind of getting this second chance, a clean slate, and they don't want to end up back in that cycle of now having squandered essentially this opportunity to pay off their debts and get ahead. They know that if they leave it up to their own devices, they'll end up, not having anything to show for that money, essentially. And then they think, okay, I need help. Now I need help to get these habits in place to make sure that I do make responsible decisions, essentially.
Right.
So it's a little bit like people who have become alcoholics or drug addicts and go to counseling until they take that first step. No one can help them very much, right? Oh, very good. Sorry, Kathleen, back to you.
So Sarah, can you walk us through the process you take when a new client comes to you and asks for help figuring out their finances? What should they expect from you?
Sure. So the first step is a free consultation, which is a 15-minute Q&A call, is what it's called. And I'll just ask them some questions about the financial challenges that they're facing to see if financial coaching is a good fit for them. And if it's something I can help with, then the next step I would recommend is a 2-hour discovery session, which is where I would come up with kind of a customized plan for their individual situation. So I would have them complete some prep work, and then during the session, I would coach them. We would come up with strategies. They would take away an action plan to kind of cut back on some of their expenses. And sometimes the solution is maybe increasing their income as well. So we would take a full picture view of their entire current financial situation in that session, and then give them some actionable steps to take to improve. And then a lot of times, like I mentioned, people need more support than that and some ongoing help. So then they could sign up for a coaching package, which would be ongoing help, ongoing support. And then they would have the accountability of regular sessions with me. And we would work together through a lot of the mindset issues that got them where they are in the first place, and B, that come up when they start trying to make changes to their finances. Things like unexpected expenses, things like just kind of the day-to-day money management and setting up sinking funds and things like that. So just kind of having that sounding board when they need to make financial decisions, and like I say, the accountability and ongoing support as they make those changes.
That's interesting. So how is that different from what a financial advisor or financial planner does?
That is a great question. And a financial advisor typically very specifically gives investment advice, and that is something that I don't do. So it's great to be clear that I cannot give specific investment advice about where to invest your money. And then financial planners are usually a little bit more long-term in nature and a little bit more holistic. So they'll help you with your long-term retirement plans, as well as things like insurance and estate planning, tax planning, things like that, all as part of your overall life retirement plans. Whereas coaching is a lot more of the day-to-day, learning financial skills to get yourself ahead, learning the habits that need to be in place budgeting is a big one. And then having someone there walking you through the steps, and having that regular expert advice and having access to that person on an ongoing basis so it kind of fast tracks your process or your progress essentially towards those other goals that those other professionals would help you with.
Okay, so for sake of our audience who might be listening and not watching, you might say to someone, you need to start saving X amount or X percent of your income tomorrow, but you've got to go to a financial advisor or your bank to decide where to put that money, correct?
Exactly.
Okay, got it. Thanks, Sarah.
So what results do your clients typically see from working with you?
So the goal is essentially to move from a place where money is causing stress and worry to a place where it's bringing you joy into your life. So from a practical perspective, that looks like paying off debt. That's a big one. Saving, putting savings into an RRSP for retirement. And then, like I say, those mindset shifts, and even just feeling more in control and more confident with their spending decisions as they start to see how they can organize their money better and organize their finances better so that they're more prepared when unexpected expenses come up, or even those expenses that we know about but don't plan for. So things like vacations, home renovations, a lot of times those things just go on credit because you haven't been planning ahead, but it's something that you really want. So having systems in place to be prepared for those expenses so that when you need a car repair, for example, that's one that you know is coming, you just don't know when, and to have that money set aside when that happens, then you don't experience that panic and that, oh, now I need to get out the credit card. And just so that feeling of like, okay, I was ready for this. And now you feel much more confident and definitely less stressed. So big kind of tangible takeaways are, paying off debt and starting to save for all of those different life happens kind of categories. But really the shift in your quality of life once you have control over those things is one of the big kind of non-tangible takeaways.
Yes. So we're heading into uncertain financial times at the moment. Many people's incomes have been drastically affected by the virus shutdowns, losing jobs, etc. And now we're looking at inflation that's getting worse than it's been in this part of the world for 20 or 30 years, right? And I've lived in other parts of the world and seen what happens when inflation gets out of control. Believe me, it's painful. So sitting here today, what if people were looking for just one tip that could improve their financial stability and their financial outlook, what would be the thing you would say they should focus on right now?
I think that the more flexible that you can be with your budget, the less you'll be impacted by these types of things. So if you really think about inflation, it impacts you at the point of purchase. So if you're spending unconsciously and you don't know where your money's going, you don't have that control and that flexibility to pull that lever to say, okay, I'm going to cut back here. And that's going to give me a cushion for things like groceries, which everybody needs, right? So inflation will impact you at the grocery store and you don't really have a lot of control over that. But if you can kind of cut back in other categories because you really know, you have that awareness of where your money is going, and where you have some room for some flexibility, then you're essentially less impacted by inflation because you're not even purchasing those things that have now gone up in price where you don't need to be.
Yeah, and speaking to a lot of people, they don't actually know what they spend their money on, even people who you would think would be financially responsible. And I've said to a number of people, how much is this increase in gas prices going to cost you? Oh, I don't know, because I'm not quite sure what I spend on gas anyway. Oh, wow. If gas goes up 25% and you were spending $300 a month, that's significant, right?
It is, it is.
Yeah.
And even changing other behaviors, like for example, I did a social media post about this 1 mile radius challenge where you try to walk everywhere that's within a mile
Yep.
of your house. And I walk a lot. I walk for exercise, but then walking to run errands is a great way to combine exercise and getting your errands done and
Sure.
saving on gas and saving the environment. So I find a lot of these things that help your pocket also help your health and the environment. The three tend to always be
And a
closely
good few.
tied together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good point.
So that's a way to also cut back on your gas expense, but a lot of people are just used to the convenience of
Mhm.
being able to drive places, and it's a little bit outside the box, I guess, to think about, or feels drastic to think about doing something like walking everywhere within a mile of your house. But I think it's worth taking a look at some of those options, especially when we're seeing such drastic increases.
That's right. And just if I can pick up on that one, I have family overseas and have spent a bit of time in England, particularly, and on the continent. And the whole mindset is different, where people there, many of them, if they just want a couple of items from what we would call a convenience store, don't even think of using their car. They say, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
we always walk down to the corner shop." I can remember my
Mm-hmm.
mother, who was nearly 90 at the time, was 90 at the time, said, I would never think of, if I had a car, I would never drive to the local corner shop because that's I walk. We all do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
quite different.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Kathleen, back to you.
as we've established, the inflation rate is skyrocketing and people's savings is being eroded. Is there still hope for people that are looking forward to retirement?
I would say yes, for sure. I think things like inflation and market crashes have the biggest impact on people who are at or close to retirement age. So for people who have a couple of decades to still work with, um, this is a great opportunity to actually increase your retirement contributions because stocks are low. And they say buy low, sell high. So now is the time really to be investing. And then when the market increases, you're capitalizing on those gains. And then you're that much farther ahead when it comes to things like inflation. I think we forget about inflation. We kind of talk about it as a theory, but it really is always kind of happening in the background. And normally you can look back 20 years and think about how much something cost then compared to how much it costs now. But now we can look back a few months and compare some of those items at the grocery store or gas, and you can compare how much they cost just a few months ago. So it's much more in our faces, but it's not something that wasn't always happening. And these inflation rates too are temporary. So if you're not kind of at that point where you're needing to use your retirement savings, like we just talked about, having the flexibility to kind of scale back on your spending is a great way to not be too heavily impacted by the current inflation rates. And then actually upping the amount that you're putting away will just increase your kind of future cushion against these types of effects.
Right.
Good
So yes, I
point.
don't think anyone needs to panic,
Okay.
especially if your time horizon is, a lot farther out. I think you have time
Sure.
to catch up.
There's something else which I'm sure you talk to your clients about, which I've personally experienced, that no matter how well off you think you are, things can change in a heartbeat. And I've personally experienced that in Africa, which was politically unstable, sure. But I went from living very well and being relatively wealthy to losing the whole lot virtually overnight. Combination of not having my eye on the ball, sure, but mainly through politics and economic crashes and timing and everything else. And these things happen even in stable places like North America, and very few people, I think, ever believe it could happen to them. And, believe me, it can. So the more prepared
Mhm.
you are, the better you are in the event of some sort of catastrophe. And of course, and breadwinners suddenly get sick and die. It's another fact of life.
And
Quite
I've been
often,
laid off before,
there you are. So you know what
even
it's
in my
about.
20s. And then at the company I worked for 10 years, there were so many mergers and acquisitions. So it was kind of like at any moment you were like, is this it for us?
Yeah.
And then finally towards the end, when I was planning my exit anyways, then I was like, now would be a great time to get a severance package and just have that little boost. And it didn't happen for me. And I would not have wished that on any of my coworkers, but I was kind of like, I'll volunteer.
Yeah. Yeah. There is that.
But you're right. Like even people think of stable employment as, something they can count on, but in our world, definitely it's not
Right.
necessarily the case.
And it, as you've just sort of alluded to, it doesn't matter where you are on the hierarchy of a corporation. When I spent a short time in the corporate world, and merger, as you said, between two huge industrial groups, and really highly paid and highly placed executives were just being told, sorry, you don't fit the new molds, goodbye. And packages were not that good in those days. So there was guys in their mainly men, but in their mid-50s, suddenly looking for a new job, having worked for the same employer perhaps for 25, 30 years. So yeah, it can be tough out there. And the better prepared you are, the more chance of surviving reasonably well. So here I've got a variation of my burning question that I ask all our successful guests, and I'm sure I put you in that category from what you've been telling us. So what would you say is the most important characteristic or quality or mindset that differentiates those people who achieve financial independence before they retire from the majority who struggle for their entire lives and live paycheck to paycheck with heavy loads of debt? Is there a single thing?
That is a great question. I think it's having a very clear picture of your why.
Okay, yes.
Why is it important to you to be financially independent? And for me, it was that drive to get out of that environment where overtime was the norm. And like I said, I saw people reaching burnout, and I thought, and I was in an accounting role, so quarter ends were 1 out of every 3 months, and they would kind of push you to the brink, and then you'd have 2 months of reprieve, and then you'd be right back into it. And I would look around at people and think, how are you doing this like for 30 years and more? I was like, I don't feel like I have this many quarter ends in me. So I started planning my exit strategy. So once I had that focus and that goal, it just felt easy to make those trade-offs between other things I could be spending my money on and what I was trying to achieve. And that's essentially what it comes down to, is trade-offs. And it's the same if your goal is to retire when you're 65. You still have a finite amount of money, and you have to pick and choose and make trade-offs, because the other thing about our world, the way it is there are so many options available for ways to spend your money.
Yes.
So for me, I knew what I wanted my money to do for me, and that was to, make the transition out of that corporate job that I knew I wasn't going to be happy in for 30 years. And it felt honestly easy, I want to say. I don't want to make it sound like it was easy, but it did not feel like sacrifice. It just felt like every, extra dollar that I could put towards that goal was, and that's another thing that I have found with clients, is that once they have a clearer picture of what their goals are, they start to look for ways to earn extra income, because now their money has a purpose for them. And it's not that feeling that it doesn't matter how much money I make, I'm just going to squander it. So that it, there's no motivation to try harder. So I think having that clear goal and that clear picture of why you are saving.
Excellent. Good. That makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Good one.
We're almost out of time, Sarah. How can people contact you?
Well, I like to say I'm all over the internet. So I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm on Instagram and Facebook at wealth.confidence.coaching. And I have a website, which is wealthconfidencecoaching.com. And all of my other contact info, like my email and my phone number, are available on the website. So follow me on Instagram, like me on Facebook. And then I have a personal account that's a public profile if anyone just wants to search me out and add me on Facebook.
Excellent. That will audience who are merely listening on one of the podcast platforms. If you go to your description, you will find all those links on there so you can get hold of Sarah. Excellent. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And once again, thank you all so very much for tuning into our show. And until next time, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.